So hello everyone, Micha and I today are going to be talking to you about the intriguing and mysterious case of the intentional process and how we use logic, intelligence to solve a number of conundrums that our clients were facing. Our story starts in the East End of London, England, Whitechapel, Shoreditch, lots of tech companies starting up, all wanting to do customer engagement, all creating chatbots, everyone trying to chat and engage as much as possible with their clients. Unfortunately, a bit of a problem was happening. Things weren't going particularly well. Some of these chatbots were being sort of killed off, destroyed, abandoned. But there was evidence of a struggle before their demise. It seemed that these chatbots weren't able to cope with all the situations they were engaged with. Yes, it was the chatbot ripper. Enraged by the frustration of misset expectations, he was just doing them in. And without any clues as to who the chatbot ripper was, we decided we had to find a way to protect the chatbots, give them a chance. And we did this by creating a safe zone for the AIs and the chatbots to overcome the expectations that had been set. So we placed sentries nearby the chatbots with instructions for them to give to guides to take you to the right chatbot or to move you on from one chatbot to another to avoid sort of problem scenarios or where things were going wrong. In this way, we managed to stop the chatbot killings. Didn't solve the case, never found who the ripper was, but what it did prove was that our framework of logic and process could overcome even the strangest of challenges. So we're going to take a very quick look at how. Obviously, we used process to define the guides, how do you get from one place to another. We also used them to define the chatbots. And these were small, replicable, repeatable processes, fragments, small pieces, microprocesses to handle micro-business situations. But how do you actually manage these microprocesses? How do you trigger them? How do you know when they're intended to be used? There's a whole world of triggers that you can have that live outside of a bpmN process. You need some way to manage and control these. So we use some of the technology available to us in case management. With case management, you get a bunch of tools that allow you to define things like stages, milestones, what processes and activities are actually relevant at a particular time. And really importantly for us, it describes the triggers, the sentries that you can be using to manage your processes. We use CMMN to describe in a declarative way the stages, the milestones, the sentries that were necessary for this, and then use BPM to actually drive the processes, what tasks, what flows, and what events you were dealing with. And with CMMN, you have the idea of stages, and a stage allows you to put a bunch of different activities together, and allows you to scope what's relevant at a particular point in time. They can be started automatically or started manually. And what you can also have with CMMN is sentries. You can have entry criteria that say when certain things are available to be started. So in this case, deduced by reasoning backwards, that stage, those activities can only start when the eliminate the impossible stage is completed. You also have exit criteria. These say when things should stop. So for example, we've got where you can have a confession given manually at any point, it could be triggered. When that's triggered, that will stop any of the activities that are currently going on in the deduced by backwards reasoning stage. Also, it will initiate and make available all of the activities in the getting things to the law. So what we were using to create the process-driven chatbots was a stage with a bunch of microprocesses within it, and then triggers that either things went off automatically or sentries that controlled what context a micro chatbot was available for. And then we also use sentries to describe the life cycle between chatbots. So how do you move from one chatbot to another? Intelligent sentries. Now imagine putting machine learning in front of those sentries, and then you've got triggers that can be happening by feature detection, anything else like that. Once you've got those smart sentries, how do you define how one chatbot transitions to another? And this is where, again, you can use the sentries to describe, okay, this chatbot is now relevant, let's switch out and move to another one because the context has changed. What we're using CMMN as like an intelligent container for these intentional processes. It declares declaratively how a process and the activities relate to each other. And of course, you can use nested cases to give richer and richer context. What we're not saying is that CMMN is a replacement for process at all. And of course, you can use this not just for chatbots. You can think of using it for self-organizing process pipelines where you've got document analysis, image detection, process mining, all of these acting as triggers or intents for these processes to happen. Now, we're going to show you some of this happening now, and we're going to use a scenario we used before with high wealth, because it's a real one, with high wealth client who wants to talk to their relationship manager. They've got millions of dollars they want to invest. They work through chat. That's how you do things these days. They're also the manager of a business. Now, as far as the bank is concerned, that means he's got to treat that person as two separate entities legally, for regulatory reasons. But as far as the person is concerned, they just are having one relationship with the bank. So how do you manage that? How do you actually switch the context and do the right thing at the right time? And at that point, I pause, relax, rest, and hand over to Micha, who's going to show you some of that magic really happening.
Right. So if we stick first with the last slide where we had the context, I want to first give you a little bit of context, see behind the scenes of how we use the models to actually do what Paul just was describing. So I want you to kind of look at a conversation, pure messaging. We use different chatbots. One of it is an AI-based chatbot, which actually tries to augment the conversation and find intents. We call them intents. And then try to fire those intents to the attached case and see what can be done right now in the current context. So first, we're going to look into the Flowable app that actually is I created for this demo scenario. So we see we have different case models. We have different process fragments or microprocesses. We have forms that we need in our sample and so on. I can then deploy and run that in my runtime. Now, one thing we want to look at now is the case model itself. This is now a little bit twofold. So one thing I want to showcase is how we can leverage case management and process management to make those chatbots a bit more smarter, contextual, give them a bit more context. That's one area. The other one is how we can actually split up a huge process, a huge end-to-end process, and all those combinations into smaller pieces. How can we actually use smaller pieces and orchestrate them using, in our case, using CMMN, where here we have our, I call it the root conversation case. I then have two different sub-cases. One is covering all the intents, all the process fragments that I can do as a private customer, as a private client to my bank. This is the private conversation case, so I can just drill down to that one. So here we see in the green, in the active stage, so whenever a client is onboarded as a private client, I can then have a set of available intents or available process fragments that I can serve to my client. The same if I'm onboarded as an institutional client, even though as a person, I'm the same person, right? But I'm talking to my bank with two different roles, basically, and the bank really has to make a clear distinction in that. So we see in the intentional banking case, I only have one process fragment added, like changing the address of my business. And the interesting part now is I also have the very same intent or the very same process fragment changing an address as a private client, although those are two different things from a banking or from the bank's perspective. Now, what we're going to do is we not only try to augment the conversation for intents, but we also try to make them smarter by using context. We call them stories. We actually monitor and build through the messages, through whatever we can read out of the messages, and build a story, build context, which we then fire to the case. So what you see here, as we call them intents, is actually from a notation point of view, it's a signal catching event, right? So we're throwing signals, those intents, we're throwing them to the case engine, and depending on the stage, depending on the context that we're in, it fires up the appropriate process fragment. If we drill down in one of those processes, for instance, if I want to get onboarded for digital asset management, it's a regular bpmN process where I can just describe what do I want to do in that particular intent to support my client. So as you can see, we use the case engine to orchestrate and making those robots a bit smarter. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to here to log in into my runtime. as Annie Austin. So Annie Austin, she's a private ultra high wealth client with the bank, having those two parts, like being a business partner on a private contract, but also for her business for the institution. Now, what I'm going to do, you're going to assume this chat might run as part of the e-banking web solution, could run on a mobile app, and the last part, I'm even going to use WhatsApp to talk to my case, my chatbots. So I can start with hello, and again an answer from my currently running on the AI chatbot, which got that hello intent and replies accordingly. Can then say, can you help me with digital asset management, for instance? Now, we grabbed another intent for digital assets, robo-advisory, those kind of hyped words now in private banking. And of course, I cannot just start with digital asset management. I need to be onboarded for that particular reason, for that particular part. So that's where the AI had got that intent, like I want to talk about digital assets, maybe I want to do something with it, but I have not yet been onboarded. So in my profile, I'm not allowed yet to use digital assets or even use robo-advisor or something like that. Now, we are smartly switching from the AI-driven chatbot into one of the intents, which is the onboarding of the client for digital asset management. I'm still in the driving seat as the client. I can say, no, I don't want to do that right now. Or I can say, yes, please, onboard me. Now here, I just have a really small KYC, know your customer part built in for the onboarding, which in real world is a bit more complicated. But we can also use now the process-driven chatbot behind the scenes to ask all those questions. So it's all about risk management. How much risk appetite do I have as a client when it comes down to investments? So I'm a little bit of a risk taker, but not a gambler.
I know you're a risk taker. You were changing this just half an hour ago.
When it comes to coding, I'm a gambler, I know. Okay, so I'm taking some risks. And then I also have to declare my cash situation, basically what are my liabilities, what are my in real estate, wealth, and all that. So Flowable is really running great. I have made some money. So I put 1 million in. Then what you see here now is, I will go back to the model in a second, is just a basic BPMN process that is actually using a conversational UI to talk me through the process. I now created the digital asset management waiver. I can open it. That was using the Flowable template engine. So you can create templates using Word, PDF, Acrobat, for instance, to actually create a document out of your case data or process data. So I created that waiver. Of course, it's just a simple document. And I have to sign it. So I could download it. Of course, I'm not going to sign it right now, but I'm just dragging and dropping into the uploading task. And I say I'm uploading the waiver. And now I am allowed, I'm onboarded for digital asset management. And now let's see what happens. Now the interesting part was that intent about digital asset management is the very same as if I say something like, do set. Now the first time we were not yet onboarded for digital asset management. We've done that now, so the context has changed, right? I'm now onboarded. In my case, I have that state. I reached that state that I'm onboarded for digital asset management, right? Now, if that same intent is fetched through my conversation, just in a little bit different, like I'm now talking about robo-advisory, I talked about digital assets before. That's the same intent, more or less. Now, the context has changed, right? So the chatbot doesn't ask or do the same thing like before. But it says, well, if you really want to go into that field, maybe it's smart to talk to your client advisor first, because it's a tricky part. If you want to set up a portfolio using robo-advisory, it's not something you do overnight, right? Now, the chatbot even asks me, do you want to let me switch you to your client advisor, to a real human, right, you want to talk to? And I say, yes, please. And that's the moment I'm going to log in as Shane Bowen, as the client advisor, running into my Flowable workplace. And I see all that ongoing conversation, which is pretty important also for human beings, desk agents, help agents, or in my case, the client advisor of Annie Austin, that I can even oversee what was going on before that conversation was handed over to me as a human being. So I see all the stuff that has been going on between Annie Austin and any of the chatbots, right? And now I can take over. As we see now, we have taken over, so the human has now taken over the conversation, and the chatbots are still there. They're still augmenting the conversation, but they're currently silent, right? So I can say, hi, Annie. And I'm saying I'm going to prepare a proposal. Now, that all, again, triggered an intent. But now, because we're in kind of silent mode, that wasn't directly interacting with my client, but it helps me as a client advisor to get my work organized by asking me, hey, I got the intent, you want to prepare something, should I create an ad hoc task for you?
And of course, that could be assisting you, but in regulatory, that could also be indicating perhaps you're talking about something that's inappropriate in a particular conversation. Or,
absolutely, yeah, true. Yeah, we also have bad language bots that actually oversee the conversation and even prevents a message being sent if it has inappropriate language parts or data leakage protection, stuff like that. So of course I'm going to say yes. And we even got a nice sticky message down there, so we don't really forget to actually prepare that proposal. And maybe I even want to create an ad hoc task out of my conversation and say, create task for me, call. And then I can even use natural language processing to talk to my chatbot and get a task there. I can always go to my inbox, to my task inbox, and I see a blended list of my tasks, either coming from processes, cases, or ad hoc tasks, tasks created out of a conversation. So I have a good overview of my work. And maybe I'm going to post some interesting information for Annie, saying, by the way, if you want to use WhatsApp. So I could also continue my conversation. Now I'm sitting at my desk. I'm using my messenger inside of my e-banking, which is pretty convenient. But maybe I'm on the go. I could use the bank's own messenger native application that we also have. But especially in Asia, we see a lot of people wanting to use WeChat, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. So we also have that integrated. Now, maybe that's, now let's say I'm done for tomorrow. I can then hand that conversation back to the chatbot. So I'm assigning it back to the chatbot. And now we're in that old mode again, where the AI-driven chatbot is actually interacting with the client directly. But let's say I want to actually really be on the go. So I'm going to use just a camera to get that QR code. And then it directly goes to WhatsApp. And I can then continue my conversation on WhatsApp. And here, of course, I'm using WhatsApp and the capability of WhatsApp, where we cannot post any forums or buttons and stuff. It's just text-based conversations. But I want to showcase that the chatbots are even smart enough to detect the abilities of the channel that my client is currently sitting on. So I can see change my address. And now I don't have that buttons or form that I can use to interact with the process. I only have messaging, right? So I can say yes, I want to do that. Then I can actually add my new address. So what we are doing here behind the scenes, the chatbot actually walks the form definition and asks for input for each of the form fields. And once we're done, it repeats the entered old and new address, and I can confirm, yes, that's fine. And then I have done that over WhatsApp. If we go back to our conversation, now I've done that over WhatsApp, like I'm on the go. I was on my private banking context. Now let's see, go back to my desk and say, I moved my. Now here we had, on WhatsApp, I had also that intent about changing my address, right? And here I'm still back and I want to change my address for my business. So the intent was the same, but we had a different context. Like now we're talking about our business, our headquarters, which is an intent that I'm now talking with my hat on of institutional banking, not private banking anymore. And I can do the same here. And just what you saw on WhatsApp now is added to the conversation as a form, because I have more abilities, more capabilities of the Flowable messenger. So I can then say, that's my business address.
It is too.
Then we can even blend in some additional content like Google Maps, for instance, to help the client to review the address that I just entered, and I'm done, right? So what we can see here is that we can leverage all the knowledge, all the information we have about context, about the stories, the intents we grab over time, about the context we have in our case. I can actually go back and show you the case. I forgot that. So here I have a representation of my case instance running behind the conversation with Annie Austin. I see the address, I see the responsible client advisor, and I can even drill down to first I can see the history, the current scenario. I see what is active, what is currently going on in my case. I can drill down to my, my private banking case. We also have that stuff in here. So green, we're still in the active stage. Blue means we completed the onboarding. We're not, and yellow means we're waiting to get an intent and other intents to kick off one of the process fragments. Of course, we can also go back to the full audit stream and see what was happening from the conversation point of view, but also from the case point of view. So we can look at it from different angles into what was going on in the past. All right. And of course, I can even see that if I'm in my case, if I go to the conversation tab, I can even see the conversation which is linked to that case in the same UI. All right. So I hope that was helping saving our chatbots, making them a bit smarter than just all those regular, just AI-driven chatbots. Are there any questions? Sure.
Specifically from the document retention perspective, the file that was uploaded, is that auto-saved to a repository, or does it require additional?
So we do have a built-in
It's a really good question.
content store. So there is a content store with metadata and all that. I mean, Micha didn't show you, but you can actually apply metadata to them as well. So it could have popped up, when you drag the file in, if you actually needed to collect metadata at the same time, you could say there's mandatory metadata needed for this content type, and you could have collected some information that's tied in. That we do have our own content management store, but you could plug that into an external content management system if you want as well.
So when I was creating that template, that was automatically stored into my document section of the case. And even when I uploaded it, that was also stored automatically as part of the case. And as Paul said, we can use our built-in content repository or delegate and use any other content management system.
Yep. Let's go here first. Yeah. So yeah, just to repeat the question for the recording, basically the question is, how hard is it to build this stuff? I think it's a short version.
All right. Well, the cool thing is maybe we could go and look into, no, probably into that part.
I think, again, the conversation we'll have later on is around how do you integrate in some of the smarter stuff. So the actual describing the case structures, that's just standard. How do I look at the problem? How do I want to break it down? Having the idea of more microprocesses, I think we've had other people talking about process fragments and things. That allows you to encapsulate sort of smaller behaviors. The challenging bit is, marking the intents is easy, but then it's how do you get the right trained information that's going to trigger those events? And it's the same answer with any of these AI type of things. It's training, find the right data to train stuff with. There's no magic there.
I think the grabbing the intents, the AI part, that's all training, right? Data, training the bot. But everything else, like once you grabbed an intent, you fired it to the case, which then, let's say this guy, is picked up as the change address intent in the institutional context. That's then pure bpmN. No more matching, no more AI, no more ML. That's just pure bpmN. So if I go to that process, that's a regular process. I have forms that I can model, kind of low-code type of style. And I can also use the interaction. I can use the service task to actually send the message to the client talking to me. So that's extremely fast.
I think the key thing, one of the things we found, the challenge with pure bpmN is just how do you describe when to use stuff, how to use stuff, and we've just found CMMN as a declarative way of expressing the context for something and the relationship between those contexts. Some of the things are really hard to do. You can do everything with bpmN. You can treat it like an assembly programming language, but certain things are really hard to do. Some exclusive, sort of switching. So we've just found CMMN, and it's been brought to us not just by us deciding this, but it's actually working with some smart customers as well. That using CMMN as a container, not using necessarily all of CMMN or doing everything with CMMN, but using selective parts of CMMN as this sort of wrapper around that allows you to control the context and then fire off these microprocesses is proving to be a really powerful way. It's very visual as well. So again, it's still, you've got the benefits of you've got with bpmN, that visual interpretation of things. So that side of it, actually just drawing out those cases and everything else, is quite straightforward. It says the challenging bit is, okay, well, I know what I want. It's just now making sure that the triggers happen depending on the external features that you want to analyze to trigger it.
Yeah, and I think also one of the takeaways that I hope we could brought across was, if we are using the combination of CMN and bpmN and DMN to actually break down my huge end-to-end processes and all that combination into smaller chunks, that really helps you to keep the overview and also prepare for changes in the future. Because process management is all about changes, right? Your organization changes, your processes are changing. If there are smaller pieces, it's more likely to be able to adapt them.
And of course, we didn't do any of the other stuff we can do with like the dynamic processes where you can magically inject it. Stuff. We showed that a couple of years ago. But yeah, you can, that combination of using case management, dynamic process injection, and things like that just allows you to be very reactive to the context you're in, and very reactive to maybe any inputs that you're getting. And if you're using machine learning and those sorts of things to give you advice, guidance around how to treat a particular context, you can have your general pattern of best practice, but then be very adaptive and agile around how you deal with a specific case by just using all of these tools together. Cool. I don't know how we are for time for...
We're a little over, but we're just going into a break, so we can keep going.
Okay.
Two very quick questions.
We will come. Yeah.
Did you finish answering?
No, you start, and then there's another guy that was waiting patiently.
So, with respect to both modeling languages, but particularly to CMN, what was the learning curve for the customer to understand what you were drawing, so that you could actually walk through what you were designing and they could comprehend it? The second question is, do you support either the export or import, the serialized form of this, either through import or export?
So in terms of the customers are trained, so because we're not using all the stuff that you can do with CMMN, it's like, there's a lot of very complex, subtle things that it can be very difficult to explain. But using just a subset of things like the sentries as to, this is how you transition maybe to using a stage as a wrapper around a set of things that gives you context. So you're not having to think about everything at one point in time. So the visual elements for these, I think, it wasn't very difficult. It's more some of the event type of things, but the concept of stages, processes, manually trigger stuff, automatically trigger stuff, that didn't seem to be something.
I think it was a bit coming down to us providing what I would call good practices. Yeah. I'm not calling that best practices because they're always a bit different, but good practices in a sense. How would I break down this end-to-end process
patterns?
Into patterns?
Maybe it's not like we're going to teach you CMMN. It was like, for this type of pattern,
that was helping. Yeah. And the second question, yes, we do support import and export of the both all three bpmN, CMN, and DMN standards.
So another, waiting patiently,
first, and then Bruce
was also.
Yeah.
So the question is the chat client part flowable? And yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's
give us some money and we'll sell you anything. No. It's a nice question for me to explain a bit about the architecture. What we've got, obviously Flowable at the core is you've got these open source engines. So the bpmN, CMMN, DMN engines, open source, go and do what you want with it. But then we layer the products around that give you more and more. So the case management tooling wraps around those, but then you can add a chat layer around that as well, which allows you to engage with the processes and cases through chat, or also within, your case management to, use chat as a way of communicating between them. But yeah, it's that sort of, there is chat there, but it's on the one of the outer layers of the product suite. Bruce.
I just had a comment. Now, for the first time, I'm interested in finding out about
Cool.
To me, what?
It's not like the rest of them haven't tried.
This. Okay. Well, I'm
We're flattered, right?
dumbstruck.
No.
Yeah. But we have to say this has been driven by real scenarios, and it's not us just getting excited about, hey, let's do some cool technology. It is, how do we solve this problem? And certain things got very difficult with bpmN. And like I say, this sort of nice layer around gives us and yeah, I think let's leave that for maybe conversations in the future. But cool, glad to hear it. Thank you.
Very good.